The roar of Formula One engines has been the soundtrack to countless sleepless nights for racing fans around the world, but tonight we're flipping the script. Instead of keeping you awake with adrenaline-pumping action, we're going to use the fascinating world of Formula One from the 2010 seconds to help you drift off into peaceful slumber. There's something oddly soothing about technical specifications, statistical achievements, and the methodical precision of modern racing that can calm even the most restless mind. The 2010 seconds decade in Formula One was a period of remarkable transformation, technological innovation, and unforgettable moments that shaped the sport we know today. As we explore these captivating details together, let your mind wander through the world of carbon fiber chassis, hybrid power units, and the relentless pursuit of those crucial thousandths of a second that separate victory from defeat. Picture yourself settling into the cockpit of knowledge as we begin our journey through 10 years of Formula One excellence. The gentle hum of information will wash over you like the steady drone of a perfectly tuned engine at cruise speed, carrying you toward a state of complete relaxation. The decade opened with a changing of the guard as Sebastian Vettel, driving for Red Bull Racing, began his meteoric rise to dominance. The young German driver, who had shown flashes of brilliance in previous seasons, suddenly found himself at the center of a racing revolution. His methodical approach to racecraft, combined with Adrian Newey's aerodynamic genius, created a partnership that would define the early years of the decade. Vettel's first championship in 2010 came after a season-long battle that wasn't decided until the final race in Abu Dhabi. The mathematical possibilities seemed endless as multiple drivers entered that decisive weekend with realistic chances of claiming the title. Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, Mark Webber, and Vettel himself all carried hopes and calculations into what would become one of the most memorable championship conclusions in the sport's history. The psychological pressure of that moment must have been immense. Imagine the weight of expectation, the careful strategy meetings, the precise fuel calculations, and the countless variables that teams had to consider. Every decision, from tire compound selection to pit stop timing, carried championship implications that would echo through racing history. As you contemplate these strategic complexities, feel your breathing naturally slow and deepen. The intricate world of Formula One strategy has a hypnotic quality, with its endless permutations and careful calculations creating a soothing rhythm of logical progression. Red Bull's dominance continued through the early part of the decade, with Vettel securing 4 consecutive championships from 2010 to 2013. During this period, the team demonstrated an almost mechanical precision in their approach to race weekends. Their methodical preparation from Friday practice sessions through Sunday's checkered flag became a masterclass in professional excellence. The RB19 through RB9 series of cars represented the pinnacle of aerodynamic efficiency for their era. Adrian Newey's design philosophy emphasized airflow management and downforce generation in ways that seemed almost artistic in their execution. The cars moved through the air with a fluid grace that made even the most complex racing maneuvers appear effortless. Consider the thousands of hours of wind tunnel testing that went into perfecting each aerodynamic element. Engineers would spend countless quiet nights analyzing data streams, adjusting minute details, and pursuing marginal gains that might only be visible in the most precise measurements. This dedication to incremental improvement has a meditative quality that speaks to the deeper human drive for perfection. The transition from the early 2010 seconds to the hybrid era, beginning in 2014, marked one of the most significant technical revolutions in Formula One history. The introduction of the V6 turbo hybrid power units represented a complete reimagining of how racing cars generated and managed power. These sophisticated systems combine traditional internal combustion engines with electric motors and energy recovery systems in ways that push the boundaries of automotive technology. Mercedes-Benz emerged from this technical revolution as the dominant force, with their power units setting new standards for efficiency and performance. Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg found themselves at the wheel of machinery that could harvest energy from braking and exhaust heat, then deploy that stored power for additional acceleration. The seamless integration of these systems required software sophistication that rivaled the most advanced aerospace applications. The sound of these new power units, while different from the naturally aspirated V8s they replaced, created their own unique symphony. The subtle whistle of turbochargers spooling up, the gentle hum of electric motors engaging, and the controlled combustion of precisely metered fuel created a more nuanced acoustic experience that many found deeply satisfying. Hamilton's return to championship-winning form during this period showcased the evolution of his driving style and strategic thinking. His battles with teammate Rosberg provided some of the decade's most compelling storylines, as two drivers with completely different approaches to racecraft found themselves fighting for the same prizes with identical machinery. The psychological dynamics of teammate rivalries have always fascinated Formula One observers. These relationships require a delicate balance of cooperation and competition, as drivers must work together to develop the car while simultaneously trying to extract every possible advantage over their garage neighbor. The tension and release cycles in these partnerships mirror the natural rhythms that help our minds process complex emotions and transition toward rest. Ferrari's struggles and occasional resurgences during the 2010 seconds provided a counterpoint to Mercedes' dominance. The Italian team's passionate pursuit of championship success, led by drivers like Fernando Alonso and Sebastian Vettel, demonstrated the enduring appeal of Formula One's most storied franchise. Their red cars, carrying decades of racing heritage, continued to capture imaginations even when victories proved elusive. The technical challenges that Ferrari faced during this period were immensely complex. Engine reliability, aerodynamic efficiency, tire management, and strategic execution all required continuous refinement and improvement. The team's engineers worked tirelessly to solve these multifaceted puzzles, often finding solutions in unexpected places. Alonso's driving during his Ferrari years represented a masterclass in extracting maximum performance from imperfect machinery. His ability to position the car in optimal racing lines, manage tire degradation, and maintain competitive pace under pressure demonstrated the highest levels of professional skill. These performances had a ballet-like quality, with smooth inputs and flowing movements that seemed to transcend the physical limitations of the machinery. The development of tire technology during the 2010 seconds added another layer of strategic complexity to Formula One racing. Pirelli's approach to tire design deliberately introduced performance variations that required teams to carefully manage degradation throughout race distances. This created fascinating strategic battles as teams balanced speed with longevity, often making split-second decisions that could determine race outcomes. The art of tire management became almost meditative in its precision. Drivers learned to sense minute changes in grip levels, adjusting their driving styles to preserve rubber while maintaining competitive lap times. This required a level of sensitivity and adaptation that speaks to the deeper connections between human consciousness and mechanical feedback. Temperature management became crucial during this era, as teams discovered that tire performance windows were narrower than previously understood. Engineers developed sophisticated monitoring systems to track surface temperatures, internal pressures, and wear patterns in real time. The data streams from these systems created hypnotic visualizations that revealed the hidden life cycles of racing tires. The emergence of new circuits during the 2010 seconds expanded Formula One's global footprint in exciting ways. Tracks like Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, and the Baku City Circuit in Azerbaijan brought unique challenges that tested both machinery and driver skill in novel ways. Each new venue required teams to develop specific setup philosophies and strategic approaches tailored to local conditions. Circuit of the Americas, with its dramatic elevation changes and sweeping curves, demanded a particular type of aerodynamic balance that favored cars with strong downforce characteristics. The track's flowing nature rewarded smooth driving styles and consistent lap times over pure peak performance, creating racing that often developed into extended battles of attrition. The Baku Street Circuit presented completely different challenges, with its long straight sections and tight castle area requiring maximum flexibility from both cars and drivers. The contrast between full throttle blasts down the main straight and delicate precision through the narrow technical sections created a unique rhythm that drivers had to master quickly during limited practice time. Weather played an increasingly important role in Formula One during the 2010 seconds, as teams developed more sophisticated tools for predicting and responding to changing conditions. Rain-affected sessions became fascinating studies in risk management and strategic timing as teams balanced the need for data collection against the dangers of track conditions. The sight of Formula One cars navigating wet track conditions has an almost therapeutic quality. The controlled chaos of spray patterns, the careful precision of racing lines on slippery surfaces, and the measured responses of world-class drivers to rapidly changing grip levels create compelling visual narratives that can be deeply relaxing to contemplate. Safety innovations throughout the decade reflected Formula One's ongoing commitment to driver protection without compromising the essential character of the sport. The development of the Halo cockpit protection system represented years of research, testing, and refinement aimed at preventing head injuries without significantly altering the visual aesthetics of the cars. The gradual implementation of these safety measures demonstrated Formula One's methodical approach to progress. Each innovation underwent extensive testing protocols, computational analysis, and real-world validation before being integrated into the championship regulations. This careful step-by-step process has a reassuring quality that reflects the sport's mature approach to balancing excitement with responsibility. The 2010 seconds also saw remarkable improvements in driver training and preparation methodologies. Simulator technology reached new levels of sophistication, allowing drivers to practice on virtual representations of circuits with unprecedented accuracy. These systems enabled thousands of hours of preparation that would have been impossible with traditional track testing alone. The mental discipline required for effective simulator work has meditative qualities that many drivers found beneficial beyond mere lap time improvement. The focused concentration, repeated practice of optimal techniques, and gradual refinement of muscle memory created training environments that promoted both performance enhancement and psychological well-being. Data analysis capabilities expanded dramatically during this period, with teams generating terabytes of information from every track session. Engineers developed increasingly sophisticated methods for processing this data, identifying patterns and correlations that revealed previously hidden aspects of car performance and driver technique. The visualization of this data often took on artistic qualities, with complex algorithms translating raw sensor information into meaningful graphical representations. These data streams flowed like digital rivers, carrying information about G-forces, throttle positions, steering inputs, and countless other parameters that together told a complete story of each lap. As the decade progressed, the integration of social media and digital platforms transformed how Formula One connected with its global audience. Fans gained unprecedented access to behind-the-scenes content, driver personalities, and technical insights that previously remained hidden within team operations. This transparency created new forms of engagement that brought the sport closer to people around the world. The rhythm of a Formula One weekend became a familiar comfort for millions of viewers. Practice sessions on Friday established baseline performance levels. Qualifying on Saturday determined grid positions through carefully structured elimination rounds, and Sunday's race provided the climactic resolution to each weekend's narrative arc. This predictable structure, filled with unpredictable moments, created a soothing familiarity that fans could count on throughout the racing calendar. Technical regulations evolved continuously throughout the 2010 seconds, with governing bodies carefully balancing competitive equality against technological innovation. Each regulation change required teams to redirect their development efforts, often leading to fascinating convergent solutions as different organizations arrived at similar conclusions through independent research paths. The collaborative aspects of Formula One engineering often go unrecognized by casual observers. Hundreds of specialists contribute to each car's development, from aerodynamicists and mechanical engineers to software programmers and materials scientists. Their collective expertise, channeled through careful project management and clear communication protocols, produces machinery that represents the absolute pinnacle of automotive technology. Manufacturing processes for Formula One components require precision that exceeds most industrial standards. Carbon fiber layup procedures, machining tolerances, and quality control measures all operate within parameters that leave virtually no margin for error. The methodical nature of these processes, repeated countless times with unwavering attention to detail, has an almost ritualistic quality that speaks to humanity's capacity for extraordinary precision. As we reach the end of our journey through Formula One's fascinating 2010 seconds decade, Let these images and ideas settle gently in your mind, like dust particles, finding their natural resting places after a long day at the circuit. The sport's combination of human skill, technological excellence, and strategic complexity creates a rich tapestry of experiences that can occupy our thoughts in the most pleasant ways. The dedication of everyone involved in Formula One, from drivers and engineers to marshals and support staff, represents human excellence pursued at the highest levels. Their commitment to continuous improvement, attention to detail, and pursuit of marginal gains creates an environment where extraordinary achievements become possible through ordinary dedication applied consistently over time. Rest now, knowing that somewhere in the world, Formula One continues its endless cycle of innovation and competition. Teams are analyzing today's data, preparing for tomorrow's challenges, and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in motorsport. Let the gentle rhythm of this continuing story carry you into peaceful sleep, where dreams of racing excellence can unfold in the most relaxing ways imaginable. You think you know Formula One, but the stories from the 1,960 seconds will blow your mind in ways that make modern racing look like a Sunday drive through the suburbs. Picture this: drivers racing at 180 miles per hour in cars made from aluminum tubes and prayers, where a crash didn't mean walking away with a bruised ego, but often meant not walking away at all. The 60s weren't just the decade that changed music and culture forever. They completely revolutionized the most dangerous sport on Earth in ways so wild that today's safety regulations would make those pioneers laugh until they cried. Let me take you back to 1960, when Formula One was essentially legalized suicide with wheels. The average life expectancy of a Formula One driver wasn't measured in decades, but in seasons, sometimes just months. These weren't just racers. They were gladiators in fire-resistant suits that weren't even truly fire-resistant yet, throwing themselves into metal death traps that could explode, flip, or disintegrate at any moment. The cars themselves were absolute marvels of controlled chaos. Imagine strapping yourself into what was essentially a bathtub with an engine, where the steering wheel was your only friend and the brakes were more of a suggestion than a guarantee. The engines were naturally aspirated monsters that screamed like banshees, producing sounds that would make today's hybrid power units sound like vacuum cleaners in comparison. These machines had no aerodynamic aids, no computer assistance, no traction control, nothing but raw mechanical fury and the driver's ability to dance with death at every corner. Safety was a concept that existed mainly in theory rather than practice. Seatbelts were optional. Helmets were basic leather caps that offered about as much protection as wearing a baseball hat in a hurricane, and roll bars were considered unnecessary weight. The tracks themselves were lined not with soft barriers and gravel traps, but with trees, telephone poles, and concrete walls that showed no mercy to anyone who dared to lose control. Monaco's barriers were literally the harbor walls and apartment buildings, while circuits like Spa-Francorchamps stretched for over 8 miles through the Belgian countryside with virtually no safety measures whatsoever. The legendary Jim Clark emerged during this era as perhaps the most naturally gifted driver who ever lived, a Scottish farmer's son who could make a racing car dance like poetry in motion. Clark had this supernatural ability to find speed where others found only terror, sliding his Lotus through corners with a precision that defied physics and common sense. His driving style was so smooth that spectators often couldn't tell he was pushing the car to its absolute limit, making 150 mile-per-hour cornering look as effortless as parallel parking. But Clark wasn't alone in this pantheon of speed demons. Graham Hill, known as the only man to win the Triple Crown of motorsport, was racing with a precision and determination that bordered on the obsessive. Hill approached racing like a chess master approaches a championship match, calculating every move while maintaining the reflexes of a jungle cat. His battles with Clark became legendary, two completely different driving philosophies clashing at speeds that would make modern drivers reconsider their career choices. The technological revolution happening simultaneously was absolutely mind-boggling. Colin Chapman at Lotus was essentially reinventing the automobile from scratch with each new car design. Chapman's philosophy was simple yet terrifying. Add lightness, and if that doesn't work, add more lightness. His cars were so minimalist that they seemed to be held together by hope and engineering genius, yet they were revolutionizing how racing cars were conceived and built. The transition from front-mounted engines to mid-mounted engines happened during this decade. completely changing the fundamental physics of how these cars behaved. Suddenly, drivers had to relearn everything they thought they knew about handling as the weight distribution shifted dramatically and the cars became simultaneously faster and more unpredictable. It was like learning to walk again while running a marathon. Ferrari was going through its own transformation, with Enzo Ferrari himself still personally involved in selecting drivers and designing cars. The Italian team was producing some of the most beautiful racing machines ever created, but beauty came with a price. Ferrari engines were powerful but fragile, capable of producing incredible speeds, but equally capable of exploding without warning, often taking their drivers' championship hopes with them. The circuits themselves were characters in this drama. Monza was known as the Temple of Speed, where cars would reach velocities that seemed impossible for the technology of the time. The banked sections created forces that pushed both man and machine beyond their limits, while the long straightaways allowed for slipstreaming battles that could determine championships. Silverstone, converted from a World War II airfield, maintained its military precision but added the chaos of wheel-to-wheel combat at incredible speeds. Spa-Francorchamps deserves special mention as perhaps the most terrifying yet beloved circuit of the era. Stretching through the Ardennes forest, it featured elevation changes that would launch cars into the air, blind corners that required absolute faith in memory and intuition, and weather conditions that could change from sunshine to torrential rain within minutes. Drivers would memorize every bump, every tree, every potential escape route, because at Spa, there often weren't any escape routes. The 1961 season saw the introduction of new engine regulations that completely reshuffled the competitive order. The move to smaller, lighter engines meant that power-to-weight ratios became even more critical, and teams that had dominated suddenly found themselves struggling to keep up. Ferrari managed this transition brilliantly, with Phil Hill becoming the first American to win the Formula One World Championship. Though his victory was overshadowed by the tragic death of his teammate Wolfgang von Trips at Monza. Speaking of tragedy, the 1,960 seconds in Formula One were marked by losses that would be unthinkable today. Drivers understood that each time they climbed into their cars, they might not climb out again. This wasn't melodrama or media hype. It was statistical reality. The sport lost talented drivers regularly, and the racing community developed an almost supernatural ability to honor the fallen while continuing to push the boundaries of speed and danger. The rivalry between British and Italian engineering philosophies played out dramatically during this period. British teams like Lotus and Cooper emphasized innovation and lightness, creating cars that were technically advanced but sometimes fragile. Italian teams, particularly Ferrari, focused on power and passion, building machines that were robust and beautiful, but sometimes lacked the cutting-edge technology of their British counterparts. This technological Cold War produced some of the most innovative racing cars ever created. Driver preparation in the 1,960 seconds was vastly different from today's scientific approach. Physical fitness wasn't considered particularly important, and many drivers maintained lifestyles that would horrify modern sports scientists. Smoking was common, drinking was acceptable, and the idea of specialized diets or training regimens was largely foreign. Drivers relied on natural talent, experience, and what could only be described as controlled recklessness. The media coverage of Formula One during the 60s was beginning to transform the sport from a niche motorsport into a global spectacle. Television was starting to broadcast races live, bringing the drama and danger directly into people's living rooms. Suddenly, the general public could witness these incredible displays of skill and courage, and the drivers began to achieve celebrity status that extended far beyond motorsport circles. The economic side of Formula One was also evolving rapidly during this decade. Sponsorship was becoming more sophisticated, with tobacco companies and automotive manufacturers investing significant money into teams and drivers. This influx of commercial interest brought both opportunities and pressures, as teams could afford better equipment but faced increased expectations for results. Weather played a much more significant role in racing outcomes during the 1,960 seconds than it does today. Without sophisticated weather prediction technology or advanced tire compounds, drivers faced conditions that could change from manageable to lethal within moments. Rain races were absolute chaos, With visibility near zero and cars sliding around like pinballs in a machine designed by someone with a twisted sense of humor. The mechanical reliability of these cars was simultaneously impressive and terrifying. Engines that could produce incredible power were also prone to catastrophic failures that could send metal fragments flying at deadly velocities. Transmission failures could lock wheels unexpectedly. Suspension components could break without warning, and fuel systems could turn a minor accident into a major conflagration. Navigation and communication were primitive by today's standards. Drivers received information from their pit crews through hand signals and basic signaling boards, if they were lucky enough to spot them while traveling at race speeds. There were no radio communications, no real-time data analysis, no sophisticated telemetry systems providing constant feedback about car performance and potential problems. The international nature of Formula One was expanding during the 1,960 seconds, with races being held in increasingly exotic locations. Each circuit brought its own unique challenges and dangers, from the high altitude of Mexico City to the extreme heat of certain venues, creating additional variables that teams and drivers had to master while maintaining competitive speeds. By the end of the decade, Formula One had transformed from a relatively small motorsport into a global phenomenon that captured the imagination of millions. The technological advances, tragic losses, incredible victories, and larger-than-life personalities had created a sport that was simultaneously more professional and more dangerous than ever before. The legacy of 1,960 seconds. Formula One extends far beyond motorsport history. The innovations developed during this period influenced automotive technology for decades to come, while the stories of courage, tragedy, and triumph became part of global sporting folklore. These weren't just races. They were epic battles between humans and machines, played out at speeds and under conditions that tested the absolute limits of what was possible. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that everything we take for granted in modern Formula One, from basic safety equipment to sophisticated car designs, was born from the incredible bravery and innovation of drivers and engineers who were willing to risk everything in pursuit of speed and glory during one of the most revolutionary decades in motorsport history. Did you know that in 1976, Niki Lauda literally came back from the dead to race Formula One just 6 weeks after his face was melted off in a fiery crash? And that's not even the craziest thing that happened in 70s Formula One. Welcome to the most insane decade in motorsport history, where drivers were basically gladiators with death wishes, and safety was just a suggestion that everyone politely ignored. I'm about to take you through the wildest, most unbelievable facts from Formula One in the 1,970 seconds that sound so crazy they can't possibly be true, but trust me, they absolutely are. From drivers who refused to wear seatbelts because they thought it was more dangerous, to races where half the field didn't even finish because their cars literally fell apart, to political scandals that nearly destroyed the sport entirely. And here's the thing that'll blow your mind the most. These weren't just isolated incidents. This was literally every single race weekend for an entire decade. The 70s in Formula One were like if someone took modern racing, removed all the safety equipment, doubled the horsepower, and then said, "You know what this needs? More fire and political drama." So grab your favorite blanket, get comfortable, and let me tell you about the decade when Formula One drivers were absolutely certifiably insane. And somehow the sport survived to tell about it. Let's start with something that sounds completely made up but actually happened multiple times. Drivers in the 70s would sometimes get out of their cars during red flag periods, walk over to their competitors' cars, and start giving them driving advice, mid-race, while both cars were still running. James Hunt once famously got out during a race stoppage, lit a cigarette, and started chatting with fans in the grandstand, like he was at a garden party instead of a life-or-death competition. But James Hunt was in a category of his own when it came to absolutely wild behavior. This guy would show up to races hungover, sometimes still wearing the same clothes from the night before, and then proceed to drive at 180 miles per hour like it was nothing. He once got so drunk the night before a race that his mechanics had to literally carry him to his car the next morning. He won that race. Hunt had this philosophy that fear would slow him down, so he did everything possible to convince himself that racing wasn't dangerous. He would party until dawn before races, not because he was irresponsible, but because his logic was that if he was too tired to be scared, he'd drive better. Somehow, this worked for him most of the time. The rivalry between Hunt and Niki Lauda was the stuff of legends, but not for the reasons most people think. Everyone knows about their 1976 championship battle, but what's really wild is how different their approaches were. Lauda was this incredibly methodical, calculating driver who knew every technical detail about his car. Hunt was basically winging it on pure talent and adrenaline. Lauda would spend hours going over telemetry data and setup sheets. Hunt would show up 10 minutes before qualifying, ask his mechanic if the car felt okay during practice, and if the answer was yes, he'd go out and set pole position. They were both incredibly successful, but their methods were completely opposite. The crash that nearly killed Lauda at the Nürburgring in 1976 is famous, but the details are even more horrifying than most people realize. The Nürburgring wasn't just long and dangerous, it was literally impossible to make safe. The track was over 14 miles long, which meant that if you crashed at the far end of the circuit, it could take 20 minutes for rescue crews to reach you. 20 minutes. Lauda's Ferrari went off the track, hit a barrier, bounced back into the middle of the track, and burst into flames. Other drivers had to stop their own cars and pull him out of the burning wreckage. Guy Edwards, Brett Lunger, Arturo Merzario, and Harold Ertl all stopped racing to save Lauda's life. These weren't professional rescue workers. These were other drivers who made split-second decisions to risk their own lives for a competitor. The really insane part is that after they pulled Lauda out, the race continued. They didn't stop the race. They didn't throw a red flag for an extended period. They just cleared the debris and kept going. A man had nearly burned to death on live television, and everyone just carried on like it was a normal racing incident. But here's where it gets even crazier. Lauda was given last rites in the hospital. Priests literally performed the ceremony for dying people because doctors thought he wasn't going to make it. His lungs were damaged from inhaling toxic smoke, his face was severely burned, and he'd lost part of his ear. 6 weeks later, he was back in a Formula One car. Not 6 months. Not even 6 weeks of recovery. 6 weeks total, from nearly dying to racing again at 180 miles per hour. His first race back was at Monza, and he finished fourth. Fourth place. In a sport where being a tenth of a second off the pace means you're nowhere near competitive, just weeks after being read his last rites. The psychological aspect of what Lauda did is almost impossible to comprehend. Getting back in a car after a normal crash is difficult enough. Getting back in after being pulled unconscious from a burning wreck requires a level of mental strength that's almost superhuman. And he didn't just get back in, he was immediately competitive again. But Lauda's comeback wasn't even the only time something like this happened in the 70s. Clay Regazzoni had a massive crash in 1973 that should have ended his career. He was back racing 2 months later. Francois Sievert died in a horrific accident during practice for the 1973 United States Grand Prix, and the other drivers raced the next day like nothing had happened. This wasn't because they were callous or didn't care about their fellow drivers. It was because accepting that what they were doing was incredibly dangerous would have made it impossible to continue. They developed this mental compartmentalization where they acknowledged that people died, mourned them briefly, and then pushed that reality completely out of their minds. The cars themselves were basically death traps with wheels. Modern Formula One cars are designed to protect the driver at all costs. If there's a choice between making the car faster or making it safer, safety wins every time. In the 70s, it was the complete opposite. Safety features were seen as unnecessary weight that would make the car slower. Drivers didn't even wear proper racing suits half the time. They'd wear regular coveralls, sometimes with minimal fire protection, sometimes with none at all. The logic was that if you crashed hard enough for fire protection to matter, you were probably going to die anyway, so why carry the extra weight? Seatbelts were optional, and many drivers chose not to wear them. Their reasoning was that it was better to be thrown clear of the car in a crash than to be trapped inside if it caught fire. This sounds insane now, but given how often cars burst into flames in the 70s and how rarely rescue crews could reach crashes quickly, it wasn't entirely irrational. The fuel they used was incredibly volatile. Modern Formula One uses fuel that's basically high-octane gasoline, but in the 70s they used exotic fuel mixtures that were much more explosive. Cars didn't just crash, they detonated. Drivers knew that any significant impact could turn their car into a bomb, and they raced anyway. Mechanical failures were constant and often catastrophic. Wheels would fall off at high speed. Suspension components would snap without warning. Engines didn't just blow up, they would literally explode, sending metal fragments flying in all directions. In 1975, it was unusual for more than half the cars to finish, a race because something hadn't broken or caught fire. The tracks were even more dangerous than the cars. The Nürburgring was the most famous, but it wasn't alone. Spa-Francorchamps was over 8 miles of public roads with no safety barriers, no runoff areas, and trees directly beside the track. If you made a mistake, you hit a tree at racing speed. There was no middle ground. Monza had almost no safety features despite being one of the fastest tracks on the calendar. Cars would reach speeds over 180 miles per hour on straights with no barriers between them and concrete walls. The banking at the Old Oval section was so steep that cars would sometimes take off and become airborne if they hit it wrong. Monaco was particularly insane because it was narrow, had concrete barriers everywhere, and absolutely no room for error. One small mistake would put you into a wall at high speed, with no possibility of a glancing blow. You either made the corner perfectly, or you hit something solid at whatever speed you happened to be traveling. The drivers knew all of this, and they raced anyway, not because they were ignorant about the risks, but because they had made peace with the possibility of dying every time they got in the car. They had to, because otherwise the fear would have been paralyzing. Jackie Stewart was one of the few drivers who actively campaigned for better safety, and he was often criticized by other drivers for being too cautious. Stewart had survived a crash in 1966 where he was trapped upside down in his car for 25 minutes while fuel leaked out around him. And he realized that the sport's attitude towards safety was going to kill everyone eventually. Stewart's safety campaigns were revolutionary, but they were also controversial within the sport. Many drivers thought that danger was an essential part of racing, and that removing it would somehow make the competition less pure. The attitude was that anyone who was worried about safety should find a different sport. The political side of 70s Formula One was almost as dramatic as the racing. Teams would show up to races with cars that were technically illegal, argue with officials about whether they should be allowed to race, and sometimes compete anyway even after being told they were disqualified. The rulebook was treated more like a suggestion than actual law. Bernie Ecclestone was just beginning to consolidate power over the sport during this period, and his methods were sometimes questionable. He would make deals with track owners, television broadcasters, and team owners that weren't always entirely above board. The financial side of the sport was often shadier than what was happening on the track. Teams were constantly trying to find loopholes in technical regulations. The Brabham BT46B, also known as the fan car, was technically legal but so obviously against the spirit of the rules that it was banned after winning its only race. It used a giant fan to create downforce, which meant it could corner faster than physics should have allowed. Ground effect aerodynamics were discovered during this period, which revolutionized car design but also made the cars much more dangerous. Ground effect cars would generate enormous amounts of downforce at high speed, but if they lost that downforce suddenly, they would become completely uncontrollable without any warning. The Lotus 78 and 79 were the first true ground effect cars, and they were dominant when they worked properly. But they were also unpredictable and difficult to drive, because their aerodynamic balance would change dramatically depending on how close they were to the ground. Drivers had to learn entirely new techniques for managing cars that behaved completely differently at different speeds. Money was always an issue in 70s Formula One, but not in the way it is now. Teams were always broke, but they were broke while doing incredibly dangerous things with limited resources. Mechanics would work on cars with basic tools, sometimes making critical safety components by hand in hotel rooms the night before races. The financial pressure meant that teams would take risks with car preparation that would be unthinkable now. They would run engines past their safe limits because they couldn't afford backups. They would repair crash damage with whatever materials were available instead of proper replacement parts. Safety was expensive, and most teams couldn't afford it. Sponsorship was just beginning to become important, but it was still relatively small scale compared to modern Formula One. Teams would paint their cars in whatever colors sponsors wanted, but the financial relationships were much simpler. There wasn't the complex web of corporate partnerships that exists now. The television coverage was primitive by modern standards, but it was also more authentic in some ways. There were fewer cameras, which meant that crashes and incidents weren't captured from multiple angles and analyzed endlessly. When something dramatic happened, viewers saw it once, in real time, without instant replay or slow-motion analysis. Race weekends were much shorter and more intense. There was no extensive practice schedule, no detailed qualifying format, and no complex technical regulations about what teams could and couldn't do between sessions. Teams would show up, make their cars as fast as possible, and race. Everything else was considered unnecessary complication. The relationship between drivers and media was completely different. Drivers would give honest, unfiltered opinions about their competitors, their cars, and the sport in general. There was no media training, no corporate messaging, and no carefully crafted public relations campaigns. When James Hunt thought someone was driving dangerously, he would say so in exactly those words. This created some incredible moments of honesty that would be impossible in modern Formula One. Drivers would openly criticize race officials, team management, and each other in ways that would cause major scandals now. But it also meant that fans got genuine insight into what drivers were actually thinking. The technical side of the sport was advancing rapidly, but without modern computer simulation or extensive testing facilities. Engineers were making educated guesses about aerodynamics and suspension setup based on limited data and driver feedback. Many innovations were discovered by accident or through trial and error. This meant that the difference between a good car and a bad car was often enormous. The best cars might be 3 or 4 seconds per lap faster than the worst ones, which created a huge performance gap that skill alone couldn't overcome. But it also meant that a small breakthrough in car design could transform a team's competitiveness overnight. The engines were works of art in their own right. These were naturally aspirated engines that produced enormous amounts of power despite relatively primitive technology. The Ford Cosworth DFV engine powered most of the successful cars of the era, and its distinctive sound became synonymous with Formula One. But engines were also incredibly unreliable. It was common for engines to last only one race, and sometimes not even that long. Teams would rebuild engines completely between races, replacing most internal components as routine maintenance. The mechanical complexity of keeping these engines running was enormous. Tire technology was advancing rapidly, which created strategic complications that don't exist in modern racing. Different tire compounds would have dramatically different performance characteristics, and choosing the right tires for qualifying versus the race was a major strategic decision. Teams had to balance outright speed against durability in ways that required genuine skill and judgment. Weather added another layer of complexity because wet weather tires were much more primitive. Racing in. The rain was extremely dangerous, but races were rarely stopped for weather conditions that would immediately red flag a modern race. Drivers had to learn to race competitively in conditions where they could barely see the car in front of them. The decade ended with significant changes that would reshape Formula One forever. The deaths of Ronnie Peterson in 1978 and several other drivers throughout the decade finally forced the sport to take safety more seriously. New regulations were introduced that began the slow process of making Formula One safer. But the spirit of 70s Formula One, where pure speed and bravery mattered more than anything else, was beginning to fade. The sport was becoming more professional, more regulated, and inevitably safer. The days when drivers could show up hungover and win races through pure talent were ending. Looking back at 70s, Formula One is like looking at a different sport entirely. The drivers were different, the cars were different, the tracks were different, and most importantly, the entire philosophy of what racing should be was different. It was more dangerous, more unpredictable, and in many ways more authentic than anything that came before or after. These weren't just professional athletes competing for prize money and championship points. These were people who had made genuine peace with the possibility of dying every time they went to work, and who found ways to perform at the absolute highest level despite that constant psychological pressure. The fact that anyone survived the 70s in Formula One is remarkable. The fact that the sport not only survived, but produced some of the greatest racing in its history is almost miraculous. It was a decade when everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and somehow everyone just kept racing anyway. Sweet dreams, and remember that the next time you think your job is stressful, at least you don't have to worry about your office catching fire at 180 miles per hour. Picture this. You're lying in bed, your mind racing from the day's chaos, and you need something to drift off to. Tonight, we're traveling back to Formula One's most legendary decade, where turbo engines screamed louder than jet fighters and drivers were essentially strapped to rockets with wheels. Close your eyes and let me paint you into the golden age of racing, where every weekend brought stories that sound almost too wild to believe. The 1,980 seconds in Formula One weren't just about racing. They were about pushing the absolute limits of what was humanly possible. Imagine engines producing over 1,500 horsepower in qualifying trim, so powerful that drivers would literally see stars from the G-forces. These weren't the refined, computer-controlled machines we know today. These were barely controlled explosions on wheels, and the men who drove them were part athlete, part daredevil, part artist. Let's start with the sound. If you've never heard a turbocharged Formula One car from the 80s, imagine standing next to a fighter jet during takeoff, but the sound never stops building. The Renault turbo engines would create a distinctive whistle that fans could identify from miles away. BMW's engines were so violent in their power delivery that they earned the nickname grenades, because nobody knew when they might literally explode. And they did explode, regularly, sending metal fragments flying across racetracks while drivers walked away shaking their heads at another retirement. The drivers of this era were characters pulled from the pages of adventure novels. Ayrton Senna, still in his early career, was already showing the supernatural car control that would make him a legend. He could feel things through the steering wheel that other drivers couldn't even imagine. Tiny changes in tire grip, microscopic shifts in the car's balance, weather pattern changes that were still miles away. Watching Senna drive in the rain was like watching magic happen in real time. Alain Prost, Senna's future rival, was already perfecting the art of racing intelligence. While other drivers attacked corners like warriors charging into battle, Prost approached them like a chess grandmaster, calculating every angle, every possibility, always thinking 3 moves ahead. His nickname, the Professor, came from this methodical approach that somehow made driving at 200 miles per hour look effortless and peaceful. Then there was Nelson Piquet, the Brazilian with a razor-sharp wit and absolutely no fear. Piquet would make jokes in 3 languages during press conferences, then climb into his car and drive like the devil himself was chasing him. He had this uncanny ability to find speed in places where physics suggested there shouldn't be any, threading his car through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow. The technology of 80s Formula One reads like science fiction. Turbo engines were essentially controlled explosions, with boost pressures so high that the metal components were stressed beyond what seemed reasonable. Engineers would rebuild engines after every practice session because the forces involved were literally tearing them apart from the inside. The fuel they used was closer to rocket fuel than anything you'd put in a street car. Exotic blends that burned so hot they could melt pistons if the mixture wasn't absolutely perfect. Ground effect aerodynamics created cars that generated so much downforce they could theoretically drive upside down on a ceiling. The Venturi tunnels under the cars created such powerful suction that drivers reported feeling like they were being pressed into their seats by invisible hands. When these systems worked perfectly, the cars seemed to defy gravity, taking corners at speeds that should have sent them spinning into the barriers. But when ground effect systems failed, they failed catastrophically. The sudden loss of downforce would send cars sliding sideways at over 150 miles per hour, with drivers having flat milliseconds to react. The skill required to save these moments was almost superhuman. Tiny corrections with steering, throttle, and brake that had to be executed with perfect timing or risk a massive accident. The racing itself was intensely personal. With only 12 or 14 teams on the grid, everyone knew everyone. Drivers would share hotel bars after races, sometimes celebrating together even after spending 2 hours trying to pass each other at deadly speeds. The paddock was smaller, more intimate, like a traveling circus of the world's most talented and slightly crazy individuals. Weather played a much more dramatic role back then. Without the sophisticated weather prediction systems we have today, rain could turn a race weekend completely upside down with little warning. Drivers had to read the sky like ancient mariners, watching cloud formations and feeling humidity changes to predict when conditions might shift. Rain races were absolutely spectacular, with cars sliding and spinning through sheets of water, drivers peering through fogged visors, making split-second decisions, that could mean the difference between victory and disaster. The pit stops were works of art in organized chaos. Without the lightning-fast choreography of modern Formula One, pit crews had to be mechanics, strategists, and fortune-tellers all at once. Tire changes took longer, but the human element was much more visible. You could see the concentration on mechanics' faces as they worked, the tension when something went slightly wrong, the celebration when everything clicked perfectly. Qualifying in the 80s was pure theater. Drivers would wait in their cars, engines warming, watching the sky and the track temperature, calculating the perfect moment to make their run. When they finally launched onto the circuit, it was with everything the car could possibly give. These weren't the measured, strategic qualifying sessions we see today. They were all or nothing attempts to find the absolute maximum speed the car could achieve. Consequences be damned. The circuits themselves told stories. Long-gone venues like the Österreichring, with its sweeping high-speed corners carved into Austrian mountains, where drivers would disappear into forests of pine trees and emerge minutes later traveling at impossible speeds. The old Hockenheimring, before chicanes tamed its long straights, where cars would reach speeds that made even the bravest drivers nervous as they disappeared into distant forests, their engines echoing off trees like mechanical thunder. Monaco in the 80s was even more claustrophobic than today, with cars that were harder to control threading through streets barely wide enough for the machines trying to navigate them. The barriers were closer, the margins smaller, the consequences more severe. Yet somehow, these gladiators would dance their cars through the Principality's streets for 2 hours, inches from disaster at every corner. Team dynamics were intensely personal. Engineers and drivers worked together like jazz musicians, improvising solutions to problems that had never been encountered before. Without computer simulations, everything was learned through experience, intuition, and sometimes painful trial and error. The relationship between a driver and his chief mechanic was almost telepathic. Subtle changes in engine sound could communicate volumes about what the car needed. The economics were completely different too. Teams operated on budgets that seem almost quaint by today's standards, which meant creativity often mattered more than pure spending power. Small teams could occasionally pull off giant-killing performances through clever engineering or strategic brilliance. The gap between the best and worst cars was enormous, but it was still possible for a brilliant driver in a decent car to challenge the established order. Safety was approaching modern standards, but still carried elements of the sport's more dangerous past. Drivers knew the risks intimately and accepted them as part of the price of pursuing perfection. The camaraderie this created was unique. These men trusted each other with their lives every weekend, creating bonds that transcended normal competitive relationships. Championship battles extended across entire seasons, with mechanical reliability playing just as important a role as pure speed. A single mechanical failure could destroy months of work, making every race finish precious. The psychological pressure was immense, knowing that one small mistake or component failure could derail an entire year's effort. Media coverage was more romantic, less clinical. Television cameras captured moments of pure human emotion, the exhaustion after a 2-hour battle in extreme heat, the frustration of mechanical failure, the pure joy of unexpected victory. Without today's saturation coverage, every glimpse into this world felt special, mysterious, almost mythological. The sounds of the paddock were different too. Instead of the whir of computer fans and electronic beeping, you heard the mechanical symphony of analog gauges, the hiss of pneumatic systems, the distinctive sound of each different engine manufacturer warming up. Each team had its own acoustic signature that fans learned to recognize from across the circuit. As you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself trackside at Monza in 1988, feeling the ground shake as the field approaches the first chicane. The smell of racing fuel and hot rubber fills the air. The crowd's roar builds to a crescendo as the championship leaders battle wheel to wheel through the temple of speed. These were the days when Formula One felt like a living, breathing entity rather than a precisely calculated spectacle. The 80s in Formula One represented something pure about competition. Humans and machines pushed to their absolute limits, creating moments of beauty and terror in equal measure, sweet dreams of turbo, whistles and racing legends. Did you know that Formula One cars from the 1,990 seconds were so loud they could permanently damage your hearing from over half a mile away? Tonight we're diving into the most fascinating and sleep-inducing facts from Formula One's golden decade, the 1,990 seconds. So get comfortable, dim those lights, and let me take you on a gentle journey through the most incredible era of motorsport. The 1,990 seconds marked a revolutionary period in Formula One racing, where technology and human skill merged in ways we'd never seen before. As we explore these captivating facts, let your mind wander through the world of screaming engines, brilliant drivers, and engineering marvels that defined an entire generation of racing. Let's begin our peaceful journey with the legendary Ayrton Senna, whose name still echoes through the paddocks today. Senna had this remarkable ritual before every race, where he would sit in complete silence for exactly 11 minutes. During this time, he would visualize every single corner of the track, every gear change, every braking point. His mental preparation was so intense that team members often described him as being in a trance-like state. This meditation-like routine helped him achieve 35 pole positions between 1,990 and 1,994, more than any other driver during that period. The McLaren-Honda partnership dominated the early 90s with their incredible attention to detail. Their mechanics would spend hours polishing every single bolt on the car, not just for aesthetics, but because they believed even the smallest aerodynamic advantage mattered. The team's workshop was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop, as every mechanic worked with surgical precision. They would often work through the night, methodically checking and rechecking every component until everything was absolutely perfect. Michael Schumacher's rise to prominence during this decade was nothing short of extraordinary. Before becoming the legend we know today, young Michael would practice his racecraft by driving go-karts in the rain for hours on end. He believed that mastering wet weather conditions would give him an edge that few drivers possessed. His first Formula One victory came at the 1,992 Belgian Grand Prix, where he drove through torrential rain with such smoothness that spectators described his car as floating across the track like a ghost. The Benetton team of the mid-90s had a fascinating approach to car development. Their engineers would create scale models of their cars and test them in a specialized wind tunnel that operated almost silently. The gentle whoosh of air through the tunnel created an almost hypnotic atmosphere as they fine-tuned every aerodynamic element. These late-night testing sessions often stretched until dawn, with engineers making tiny adjustments that could improve lap times by mere thousandths of a second. Ferrari's return to competitiveness in the late 90s was built on a foundation of meticulous preparation and Italian passion. Their Maranello factory became a temple of automotive engineering, where every surface was kept spotlessly clean and every tool had its designated place. The sound of their engines being tested would echo through the Italian countryside like a distant symphony, creating a rhythmic melody that locals grew to love and anticipate. The Williams team during this era was renowned for their innovative approach to data collection. They developed one of the first comprehensive telemetry systems that could monitor hundreds of parameters in real time. Engineers would spend quiet hours analyzing streams of data, looking for patterns and anomalies that could unlock precious tenths of a second. The gentle hum of their computers working through the night became the soundtrack of their pursuit of perfection. Nigel Mansell's championship-winning season in 1992 was built on an almost obsessive attention to physical fitness. He would wake up every morning at 5:30 and begin his day with a gentle stretching routine that lasted exactly 45 minutes. His trainer described these sessions as meditative, with Mansell focusing completely on his breathing and mental preparation. This disciplined approach helped him maintain concentration during races that often lasted over 2 hours in sweltering heat. The technology revolution of the 90s brought us the first semi-automatic gearboxes, which changed the way drivers approached their craft. These systems allowed for incredibly smooth gear changes, creating a more fluid driving experience. The gentle click of the paddle shifters became the new rhythm of Formula One, replacing the dramatic gear lever movements of previous decades. Drivers had to retrain their muscle memory, spending countless hours in simulators perfecting their technique. Damon Hill's journey to the 1996 World Championship was a story of quiet determination and gradual improvement. After his father Graham's tragic accident, Damon approached racing with a calm, methodical style that emphasized consistency over flashy speed. He would spend hours studying video footage of his races, making notes in a leather-bound journal that he carried everywhere. His approach was so systematic that team members often compared him to a scholar studying for the most important exam of his life. The Tyrrell team had one of the most unique approaches to race preparation during the early 90s. Their small workshop in Surrey operated more like a craftsman's studio than a high-tech racing facility. Each mechanic was responsible for specific components and would work on them with the patience and care of a master clockmaker. The quiet concentration in their workshop was so intense that visitors often spoke in whispers, afraid to disturb the delicate work being performed. Safety innovations during this decade were largely driven by lessons learned from previous accidents. The introduction of improved crash barriers happened gradually. With each circuit implementing changes during their quiet off-season periods, engineers would spend months calculating impact forces and designing energy-absorbing structures that could save lives. These developments occurred behind the scenes, in research facilities where scientists worked with quiet dedication to make the sport safer. The Jordan team brought a refreshing approach to Formula One with their distinctive yellow and green livery. Eddie Jordan's philosophy emphasized creating a family atmosphere within the team, where mechanics and drivers would often share quiet meals together after long days at the track. This approach fostered a sense of unity that many larger teams struggled to achieve despite their greater resources. Gerhard Berger and Gene Alesi formed one of the most entertaining driver pairings at Ferrari during the mid-90s. Their friendship extended beyond the track, with both drivers sharing a love for practical jokes and lighthearted moments that helped ease the intense pressure of Formula One racing. They would often spend evenings together, sharing stories and discussing racing techniques in the peaceful surroundings of the Ferrari hospitality area. The evolution of tire technology during this decade was a quiet revolution that dramatically improved performance. Goodyear's engineers would work through the night, testing different rubber compounds in climate-controlled facilities that maintained perfect silence. The process of developing new tire formulations required incredible patience, with each compound needing weeks of testing before it could be approved for race use. Rain races during the 90s created some of the most memorable moments in Formula One history. The gentle patter of raindrops on car bodywork often preceded dramatic changes in race positions, as some drivers excelled in wet conditions while others struggled. The skill required to handle a Formula One car in the rain was extraordinary, demanding a delicate touch and complete trust in the car's capabilities. Circuit changes throughout the decade often happened during the quiet winter months, when tracks would be modified to improve safety or racing quality. The Montreal circuit's famous hairpin was refined several times during this period, with engineers carefully calculating the optimal radius and banking to create exciting racing while maintaining safety standards. These modifications required months of planning and precise execution. The McLaren-Mercedes partnership that began in the mid-90s represented a meeting of two engineering philosophies. Mercedes brought their methodical German approach to reliability and precision, while McLaren contributed their innovative British engineering heritage. Their collaboration meetings were conducted with scientific precision, with every detail documented and analyzed for future reference. Qualifying sessions during this era had a unique rhythm, with drivers completing their flying laps during carefully chosen moments when track conditions were optimal. The practice of fuel-burning runs meant that cars would gradually become lighter and faster throughout the session, creating a natural crescendo of performance that kept spectators engaged until the final seconds. The rivalry between Schumacher and Hill during the mid-90s was characterized by mutual respect despite their intense competition. Both drivers approached their craft with similar dedication, spending countless hours studying race footage and working with their engineers to find every possible advantage. Their championship battles were decided by the smallest of margins, often just a few points after an entire season of racing. Team radio communications during this period were much simpler than today's constant chatter. Drivers and their pit crews would communicate in short, precise messages that conveyed essential information without unnecessary distraction. The crackle of the radio transmissions became part of the race day atmosphere, connecting drivers to their teams across the miles of racetrack. The introduction of mandatory pit stops transformed race strategy, requiring teams to develop sophisticated timing systems and practiced choreography for their pit crews. These stops became balletic performances, with each team member executing their role with precision timing. The gentle whoosh of air guns and the rhythmic movement of the crew created a hypnotic spectacle that lasted just seconds, but required hours of practice to perfect. European races during this decade often took place in picturesque settings that provided a beautiful backdrop to the high-speed action. The Imola circuit, nestled in the Italian countryside, offered a serene environment where the roar of engines contrasted with the peaceful surroundings. Similarly, the Silverstone circuit in rural England provided a quintessentially British atmosphere where tradition and modern technology coexisted harmoniously. As we near the end of our journey through these fascinating Formula One facts from the 90s, take a moment to appreciate how this incredible decade shaped the sport we know today. The innovations, personalities, and moments we've explored together represent a golden age of racing that continues to influence Formula One even now. The legacy of the 1,990 seconds lives on in every modern Formula One race, from the advanced safety systems developed during that era to the driving techniques perfected by legends like Senna and Schumacher. As you drift off to sleep tonight, let your mind wander through those sun-drenched circuits and rain-soaked tracks where automotive history was written one lap at a time. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be as smooth as a perfectly executed racing line through the gentle curves of these incredible Formula One memories from the magnificent 1,990 seconds. Did you know that in 2005, a Formula One driver literally fell asleep during a race and still managed to finish? Tonight, we're diving into the most mind-blowing, sleep-inducing facts from F1's golden 2000s decade that'll have you drifting off to dreamland faster than a Ferrari on the Monza straight. Get comfortable, because these stories are about to become your new bedtime routine. Picture this. It's 2008, and Lewis Hamilton is about to lose the World Championship in the final corner of the final lap of the final race. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a DRS wing, yet somehow this moment perfectly captures the dreamy, almost surreal nature of that entire decade in Formula One. The 2000s weren't just about speed and competition. They were about moments so incredible they felt like they belonged in your deepest sleep fantasies. Let's start with something that sounds like it came straight from a peaceful dream. Back in 2004, Michael Schumacher won his 7th and final World Championship. But here's the thing that'll make you feel all warm and cozy. He was so dominant that season that by mid-year, some races became as predictable as counting sheep. Fans would literally show up to Silverstone or Spa, knowing that barring a miracle, they were about to watch the red Ferrari cruise to another victory. There's something oddly comforting about that level of certainty, like a familiar lullaby that rocks you to sleep every Sunday afternoon. Speaking of soothing sounds, have you ever heard the gentle hum of a V10 engine at idle? During the early 2000s, these magnificent machines produced a sound so melodic that mechanics would often describe it as therapeutic. The BMW V10 that powered Williams from 2000 to 2005 had this particular resonance at low RPMs that engineers nicknamed the purr. Imagine falling asleep to that sound every night. A mechanical lullaby that only the most privileged few ever experienced in person. Here's a fact that feels like something from a peaceful dream. In 2002, the Hungarian Grand Prix was so processional, so utterly predictable, that the television director actually fell asleep in the broadcast booth during the middle stint. When he woke up 40 minutes later, the running order hadn't changed at all. Michael Schumacher was still leading, Rubens Barrichello was still second, and the rest of the field was following like a perfectly ordered queue. The director later said it was the most restful nap he'd had in years. But let's talk about something even more dreamlike. The 2003 season featured one of the most bizarre weather patterns in F1 history. At the Malaysian Grand Prix, it rained so gently and consistently that drivers described it as driving through a cloud. The spray from the cars ahead created this ethereal mist that made the entire race look like it was happening in slow motion. Jenson Button, who finished 4th that day, later said the experience was so surreal he had to pinch himself to make sure he wasn't actually dreaming. Now here's where things get really interesting for your sleep routine. Did you know that during the 2000s, several drivers developed pre-race meditation techniques that were essentially modified sleep induction methods? Juan Pablo Montoya, the Colombian sensation who joined Williams in 2001, used to spend 30 minutes before each race in what his trainer called active dreaming. He would visualize the entire circuit in slow motion, imagining himself floating through each corner like he was drifting through a peaceful dream sequence. The technology of that era also had this wonderfully analog, almost vintage quality that's perfect for bedtime stories. The cars still used 6-speed manual transmissions, which meant drivers had to physically shift gears throughout the race. There's something deeply satisfying about imagining the rhythmic click-click-click of a driver working through the gearbox at Monaco. Each shift is precise and regular as a metronome, helping you fall asleep. Here's a fact that'll make you smile as you drift off. Fernando Alonso's first championship in 2005 almost didn't happen because his Renault team forgot to pack his lucky sleeping mask for the Brazilian Grand Prix. Alonso had used the same blue silk eye mask for his pre-race naps since his karting days, and when it went missing from his travel bag, he nearly had a panic attack. The team's physiotherapist had to fashion a makeshift replacement from a spare t-shirt and some medical tape. Alonso went on to win the race and secure his first title, but he slept with one eye open that night just to be safe. The circuits themselves tell sleepy stories from this decade. The old Hockenheimring configuration, used until 2001, had these long flowing sections through the German forest where drivers would reach incredible speeds in almost complete isolation. Many drivers described those forest sections as meditative, almost trance-like. The trees created natural sound barriers that muffled the engine noise, and the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy made everything feel dreamlike and peaceful. Let's talk about qualifying formats, because believe it or not, they're surprisingly soothing to think about. The 2003 season introduced single-lap qualifying, where each driver got exactly one chance to set their fastest time. There was something beautifully simple about this format, like a bedtime ritual where each driver had their moment of zen, alone on the track with nothing but the clock and their own skill. No traffic, no confusion, just pure meditative speed. Speaking of meditative, the warm-up sessions on Sunday mornings during this era were like Formula One's version of sunrise yoga. Teams would send their cars out just as the morning mist was lifting from circuits like Suzuka or Interlagos, and the gentle pace of these sessions created this incredibly peaceful atmosphere. Drivers would use this time to reconnect with their cars after Saturday's intensity, and many described it as the most peaceful part of their weekend. Here's something that sounds like it belongs in a bedtime story. During the 2006 season, there was a gentleman's agreement between drivers about radio communications. They would only speak to their pit crews when absolutely necessary, creating these long stretches of beautiful silence where the only sounds were engines and wind. Kimi Räikkönen took this so seriously that he once went an entire practice session without saying a single word over the radio, earning him the nickname the Silent Finn. The pit stops of this era had their own dreamy quality too. Without the modern pneumatic systems, tire changes took longer and had this wonderful mechanical rhythm. The choreography of an early 2000s pit stop was like watching a carefully rehearsed dance performed in slow motion. Each mechanic knew their role perfectly, and the whole process had this hypnotic quality that could easily lull you into a peaceful trance. Let's drift into some of the more whimsical stories from this decade. At the 2004 Monaco Grand Prix, a stray cat somehow found its way onto the track during Friday practice. The session was immediately red flagged, but instead of rushing to remove the cat, track marshals spent nearly 20 minutes trying to coax it down from the barriers with gentle calls and offered treats. The cat eventually wandered off on its own, but not before taking what appeared to be a leisurely nap right on the racing line at Casino Corner. The relationship between drivers and their personal routines during this era is absolutely perfect for bedtime reflection. Rubens Barrichello had this elaborate pre-race ritual that included exactly 17 minutes of what he called peaceful visualization, where he would imagine driving the perfect lap in slow motion. He would picture every braking point, every apex, every shift, all while lying completely still with his eyes closed. His mechanics learned not to disturb him during this time, and the garage would fall completely silent except for the gentle hum of computer cooling fans. Here's a technological detail that's surprisingly soothing. The data acquisition systems of the early 2000s recorded information at much slower rates than modern systems. Instead of thousands of data points per second, they captured maybe a few dozen. This meant that when engineers reviewed the data after sessions, everything appeared much smoother and more flowing than today's hyper-detailed telemetry. Looking at those gentle curves and gradual transitions was almost like watching a meditation app visualization. The weather patterns during that decade created some absolutely dreamy racing conditions. The 2007 European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring took place during what meteorologists called a perfect atmospheric window. The temperature was exactly 72 degrees, there was zero wind, and the humidity created this soft, almost ethereal quality to the light. Drivers later described it as racing inside a snow globe. Everything felt protected and peaceful despite the intense competition. Let me tell you about the most relaxing crash in F1 history. During the 2001 Austrian Grand Prix, Nick Heidfeld's Sauber suffered a mechanical failure that sent him into the gravel trap at turn 4. But instead of the violent impact you might expect, his car slid through the gravel so gently that it looked like he was skiing through fresh powder. The car came to rest against the tire barriers with barely a scratch, and Heidfeld climbed out looking more refreshed than shaken. He later joked that it was the most comfortable ride he'd had all weekend. The social aspects of the paddock during this era had a wonderfully sleepy, almost village-like quality. Unlike today's massive commercial operations, the F1 circus of the 2000s was smaller and more intimate. Team motorhomes were simpler affairs, often with drivers taking actual afternoon naps between massive sessions. There are photos from this period showing world champions literally curled up on sofas in their team's hospitality areas, catching quick power naps like contented cats in sunbeams. Here's something that perfectly captures the dreamy essence of that decade. The cameras were different then. The broadcast technology created this slightly soft, almost film-like quality that made everything look more romantic and dreamlike than today's ultra-sharp digital coverage. Watching old races from this period is like looking at the world through a gentle filter that takes the harsh edges off reality. The spare car regulations of that era tell their own sleepy story. Each team was required to have a third car available for practice sessions, which meant there were always these perfectly prepared machines sitting quietly in the garages, waiting patiently for their moment. These spare cars had this almost melancholy beauty, like sleeping giants ready to spring into action but content to rest until needed. As we wind down our journey through the dreamiest decade of Formula One, remember that the 2000s gave us something that modern racing sometimes lacks: moments of genuine peace within the chaos. Whether it was the gentle hum of those V10 engines, the soft focus of period cameras, or simply the more human scale of the entire operation, that decade created a perfect blend of excitement and tranquility. So tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine yourself trackside at Monza in 2004, feeling the warm Italian sun on your face as those beautiful red Ferraris glide past in their familiar formation. Picture the gentle rustle of leaves in the Royal Park, the satisfied sighs of fans who knew they were witnessing something special, and the peaceful certainty that some things in this chaotic world remain beautifully, perfectly predictable. Sweet dreams, and remember, sometimes the best stories are the ones that help us drift away into peaceful sleep, where speed limits don't exist, and every lap is a perfect lap. The 2000s weren't just a decade of racing, they were a decade of dreams. And tonight, those dreams are yours to enjoy. Did you know that Formula One drivers lose up to 8 pounds of body weight during a single race just from sweating? That's like losing a gallon of water while driving at speeds that would make your morning commute look like a leisurely stroll through the park. Welcome back to the channel, where we dive deep into the most mind-blowing facts about the world's most elite motorsport. If you're someone who finds the gentle hum of engines and the rhythmic cadence of racing facts oddly soothing, then you've clicked on the perfect video. Tonight, we're taking a journey through the most fascinating Formula One discoveries and developments from the 2020 seconds, presented in a way that's perfect for winding down after a long day. So grab your favorite blanket, get comfortable, and let's explore the incredible world of modern Formula One together. The 2020 seconds have been absolutely revolutionary for Formula One, bringing changes that have completely transformed how we think about racing, technology, and human performance. From groundbreaking safety innovations to mind-bending aerodynamic discoveries, this decade has pushed the boundaries of what's possible when humans and machines work in perfect harmony. Let's start with something that perfectly illustrates just how extreme these machines really are. Modern Formula One cars generate so much downforce that they could theoretically drive upside down on a tunnel ceiling at speeds above 120 miles per hour. The aerodynamic forces pressing these cars onto the track are so powerful that they create a vacuum effect underneath the vehicle that's stronger than gravity itself. Engineers have calculated that at top speed, a Formula One car experiences downforce equivalent to having 3 additional cars stacked on top of it. This incredible downforce capability became even more fascinating in the 2020 seconds when teams began utilizing ground effect aerodynamics in ways that hadn't been seen since the late 1970 seconds. The reintroduction of ground effect. Tunnels underneath the cars created a completely new paradigm for how these machines interact with the air around them. The Venturi tunnels carved into the floor of modern Formula One cars accelerate air underneath the vehicle so rapidly that they create a low-pressure zone that literally sucks the car onto the track surface. Speaking of aerodynamics, did you know that the total surface area of all the aerodynamic elements on a modern Formula One car is equivalent to about half a tennis court? Every single curve, wing, and surface has been sculpted using computational fluid dynamics that require supercomputers running calculations for weeks just to optimize a single component. The front wing alone consists of dozens of individual elements, each one precisely angled to direct airflow exactly where engineers want it to go. The technological sophistication extends far beyond what you can see on the surface. Modern Formula One cars are essentially mobile data centers, equipped with over 300 sensors that monitor everything from tire pressure and temperature to the exact angle of every suspension component. These sensors generate approximately 1.5 gigabytes of data during a typical race weekend, which is roughly equivalent to storing 750 high-resolution photographs every single lap. Teams analyze this data in real time using artificial intelligence algorithms that can predict tire degradation, optimal pit stop timing, and even anticipate mechanical failures before they happen. The machine learning systems have become so sophisticated that they can detect patterns in driver behavior that even the drivers themselves aren't consciously aware of. These AI systems can identify when a driver is pushing beyond the optimal limits and recommend specific adjustments to driving technique that can save precious tenths of a second per lap. The physical demands on drivers have reached levels that would challenge Olympic athletes. During the 2020 seconds, sports scientists discovered that Formula One drivers experience G-forces that are comparable to fighter jet pilots, but they maintain these forces for extended periods rather than brief moments. When braking from top speed, drivers experience deceleration forces of up to 6 Gs, which means their body weight effectively increases by 6 times. A driver who weighs 150 pounds suddenly feels like they weigh 900 pounds, and they have to maintain precise control while experiencing this extreme physical stress. The neck muscles of Formula One drivers have adapted to withstand lateral G-forces that would cause most people to lose consciousness. During high-speed cornering, drivers experience sustained lateral forces of up to 5 Gs, which means their head, normally weighing about 11 pounds, suddenly feels like it weighs 55 pounds being pulled sideways. Professional drivers train their neck muscles to the point where they can support nearly twice their body weight in lateral force, while maintaining the fine motor control necessary to operate the steering wheel with millimeter spurious precision. Heat management became an even more critical factor in the 2020 seconds as engineers pushed power unit efficiency to new limits. The internal temperature of a Formula One engine during a race can exceed 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is hot enough to melt copper. The cooling systems required to manage this heat are so sophisticated that they can circulate coolant at rates exceeding 100 gallons per minute, while maintaining temperature control within a few degrees across the entire power unit. The hybrid power units introduced in 2014 and refined throughout the 2020 seconds represent some of the most advanced internal combustion technology ever created. These power units achieve thermal efficiency rates of over 50%, which means they convert more than half of the fuel's energy into mechanical power. For comparison, a typical road car engine achieves thermal efficiency of only about 25%. This incredible efficiency is achieved through advanced turbocharging, direct injection, and energy recovery systems that capture waste heat and convert it back into usable power. The Energy Recovery System, or ERS, can harvest up to 4 megajoules of energy per lap from both the turbocharger and brake systems. This recovered energy can then be deployed strategically to provide an additional 160 horsepower for up to 33 seconds per lap. The strategic deployment of this extra power has become a crucial element of race strategy, with teams using complex algorithms to determine the optimal moments to deploy and harvest energy throughout a race. Tire technology has evolved dramatically throughout the 2020 seconds, with compounds becoming increasingly specialized for specific track conditions and temperatures. Modern Formula One tires operate within temperature windows as narrow as 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and even small deviations from optimal temperature can cost several seconds per lap. The tire surface temperature can vary by more than 100 degrees between different parts of the same tire during a single corner, requiring incredibly sophisticated rubber compounds that can maintain grip across these extreme temperature variations. The construction of modern Formula One tires involves over 200 individual components, including specialized belts, compounds, and reinforcement materials. The tread pattern is so precisely engineered that changing the depth of the grooves by even half a millimeter can significantly alter the tire's performance characteristics. Teams spend millions of dollars on tire testing and analysis, using infrared cameras and embedded sensors to monitor tire behavior in real time. Safety innovations in the 2020 seconds have pushed driver protection to unprecedented levels. The introduction of the Halo Head Protection System marked a fundamental shift in Formula One safety philosophy. This titanium structure can withstand forces equivalent to the weight of a double-decker bus, providing protection against impacts that would have been fatal in previous eras. The Halo weighs only 15 pounds, but can deflect projectiles traveling at speeds exceeding 150 miles per hour. The development of advanced barrier systems has revolutionized track safety throughout the 2020 seconds. Safer barriers and debris fencing systems can absorb impact energy that would have caused devastating injuries in earlier decades. These barriers use honeycomb construction and energy-absorbing materials that can dissipate the kinetic energy of a 1,400-pound car traveling at 200 miles per hour over a distance of just a few feet. Modern racing suits incorporate fire-resistant materials that can withstand temperatures exceeding 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit for extended periods. The multi-layer construction includes aramid fibers, Nomex, and specialized membranes that not only protect against fire, but also help regulate body temperature and wick moisture away from the driver's skin. These suits are so advanced that they're lighter than many casual jackets, while providing protection that exceeds what firefighters wear into burning buildings. Communication systems have become incredibly sophisticated, allowing drivers and teams to maintain constant contact throughout the race. The radio systems can filter out wind noise and engine noise so effectively that drivers can have conversations at 200 miles per hour that sound as clear as a phone call. Teams can transmit real-time data directly to displays in the cockpit, providing drivers with instant feedback about tire temperatures, fuel consumption, and gap times to other competitors. The steering wheels of modern Formula One cars are essentially handheld computers with more processing power than early NASA spacecraft. These wheels contain dozens of buttons, rotary switches, and digital displays that allow drivers to adjust brake bias, differential settings, fuel mixture, and energy deployment strategies without taking their hands off the wheel. The complexity of these controls is so advanced that teams employ dedicated engineers whose sole job is to optimize the steering wheel interface for each individual driver. Weather monitoring has become incredibly precise, with teams using satellite data, trackside sensors, and even drones to monitor atmospheric conditions with unprecedented accuracy. Modern weather prediction systems can forecast rainfall intensity and location within specific track sectors up to 30 minutes in advance. This information allows teams to make strategic decisions about tire selection and pit timing that can determine race outcomes. The logistics of modern Formula One are staggering in their complexity and scale. Teams transport over 40 tons of equipment to each race, including multiple complete car setups, spare parts, computers, and support equipment. The precision required to coordinate these operations across 23 races in different countries throughout the year requires logistics planning that rivals military operations. Teams employ dedicated logistics coordinators who plan transportation routes, customs clearance, and equipment setup months in advance. Circuit preparation has evolved to include surface treatments and track modifications that optimize racing conditions. Track surfaces are treated with specialized rubber compounds and cleaning agents that remove oil and debris while maintaining optimal grip levels. The precision of track preparation has become so advanced that surface conditions can be maintained within tolerance levels measured in fractions of millimeters. Modern Formula One engines rev to speeds exceeding 15,000 revolutions per minute while maintaining reliability standards that allow them to complete multiple race distances without major maintenance. The internal components move at speeds where pistons accelerate and decelerate faster than bullets, yet these engines can operate for hours at these extreme speeds, while maintaining power output within a few percentage points of peak performance. Carbon fiber construction used in modern Formula One chassis is stronger than steel while weighing less than aluminum. The monocoque structure that forms the core of each car undergoes testing that subjects it to forces equivalent to 25 times the car's weight in every direction. These structures are so precisely manufactured that the weight distribution can be controlled to within ounces, allowing engineers to optimize the car's center of gravity and rotational inertia with incredible precision. Fuel technology has advanced to the point where modern Formula One fuel contains over 100 individual chemical compounds, each one precisely formulated to optimize combustion characteristics at different engine speeds and loads. The fuel must meet environmental standards that require it to contain a significant percentage of sustainable biofuel components while maintaining the energy density necessary for peak performance. The mental demands on drivers have increased dramatically as cars have become more complex and data-rich. Modern drivers must process information from multiple sources simultaneously while making split-second decisions at speeds where reaction times are measured in milliseconds. The cognitive load is so intense that sports psychologists work with drivers year-round to develop mental training techniques that enhance focus, decision-making, and stress management under extreme conditions. As we wrap up this journey through the incredible world of modern Formula One, it's clear that the 2020 seconds have brought innovations that push the absolute boundaries of what's possible when human ingenuity meets cutting-edge technology. From the aerodynamic wizardry that allows cars to generate downforce equivalent to multiple vehicles stacked on top of each other, to the sophisticated hybrid power units that achieve efficiency levels that surpass most industrial applications, Formula One continues to serve as a testing ground for technologies that eventually make their way into everyday life. The drivers who compete in this sport are modern gladiators, athletes who must combine the physical conditioning of Olympic competitors with the mental acuity of chess grandmasters and the technical knowledge of aerospace engineers. They operate machines that generate data at rates that require supercomputers to analyze while experiencing physical stresses that would overwhelm most people. The safety innovations developed throughout the 2020 seconds have created protection systems that can withstand impacts that would have been unsurvivable just a decade ago. While the environmental initiatives are pushing the sport towards sustainability goals that seemed impossible just a few years ago, the precision required in every aspect of the sport, from tire temperature management to fuel chemistry to aerodynamic optimization, represents human engineering achievement at its absolute peak. Whether you're using these facts to wind down for the night or simply expanding your appreciation for one of the world's most technologically advanced sports, remember that Formula One represents the perfect fusion of human ambition and technological innovation. Each race weekend brings together hundreds of the world's most talented engineers, mechanics, and drivers to push the boundaries of what's possible when speed, precision, and safety converge at the highest level. Sweet dreams, and remember that tomorrow brings new innovations and discoveries that will continue pushing the limits of what we thought was possible in motorsport. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the fascinating world of modern Formula One.